Hello, everybody. Welcome to our panel, which is the race to EV. We're going to go and just introduce ourselves quickly and talk a little bit about what our interaction is, what we do in the EV space, and then get into our discussion. I am Cipriano. I'm a partner in the global law firm Squire Patton Boggs. I also lead our automotive group, and our law firm is a firm that represents OEMs, suppliers, new market entrants, especially smart mobility tech companies in every aspect of their business. We've got more than 1,500 attorneys, and we're located in 46 different offices in 21 countries, including an Israel desk that has been working with companies and law firms here in Israel for the past 15 years. I'm delighted to be joined by several of my partners today and to be at the EcoMotion conference, which we're sponsoring. It's a very exciting time to be talking about electric vehicles. We know from just looking at a couple facts from last year, EV sales of vehicles increased twofold year over year. Been some tremendous technological improvements that have begun to bring down cost. And we've also seen leading economies and markets that are doing some interesting things to incentivize the development of the technology. At the same time, many challenges exist which we need to address if we're going to have EV technology proliferate in the way that we all hope and expect. So in order to discuss some of those opportunities and challenges, we've got a terrific panel of industry-leading experts who are involved in EV technology. And I'll start with Houde here to my right, who will introduce each of themselves, and to talk about what they do.
Yeah, my name is Ute Winter, and I have been working for General Motors here in Herzliya for 11 years. For many years, I worked in R&D to define the new speech user experience technologies and other user experience technologies. And lately, I've moved to a role as product manager for electric vehicle customer experience. And our General Motors Center here in Israel focuses in general on AV and EV technologies, and has almost 350 engineers by now and researchers.
Hi, I am Moran. I'm the founder and CEO of IRP Systems. We develop high-performance electric powertrain systems for aerospace and for automotive platforms, covering the entire range of micromobility vehicles, from scooters to vehicles to e-planes.
Hi, I'm Brin from Champion Motors. We are the distributor and importer of Volkswagen Group to Israel. And I'm responsible for the innovation activity that we have. We are investing in auto tech startups, and also collaborating with two of the Volkswagen Group brands. With the Skoda Auto, we've established a joint venture called Skoda Auto Digital Lab Israel, and with the SEAT, a team called Explorer. Both of them are looking and scouting for technologies here in Israel to implement in their cars or services.
Hi, my name is Dominique Houde. I'm a partner at Drakestar Partners, the technology investment bank. And we work a lot with entrepreneurs and startups in the mobility side. So I lead the mobility practice. And among some of the transactions we have worked on is the sale of the new Motion in the Netherlands to Shell, and Allego, the other EV charging company, to Meridiam, the French infrastructure funds. So a lot of what we do is working with those entrepreneurs, and also to see how we can bring capital, more mainstream capital, in the EV charging infrastructure field.
Daniel Zucker from the Fuel Choices and Smart Mobility Initiative at the Israeli Prime Minister's office. First of all, I'm very happy to see you all, and I hope you have a good time here. We coordinate all the governmental efforts regarding smart mobility and fuel alternatives, and inside the initiative, my role is to be the head of the local market, which is really to implement the technologies into the Israeli market.
Great, thank you, Daniel. So the title of our panel is The Race to EV, and one of the things we talked about before this discussion was how do we get EV to a tipping point, eliminate some of the obstacles and hurdles so that it really is a race and we really do achieve what we think we can achieve in the EV space? With that in mind, I guess I'll throw out maybe an open-ended question. I'll start with you, Tal. Thinking about that and moving forward, what hurdles do you see that pose the greatest impediment to moving EV forward right now?
Well, I think it's most of it is the infrastructures. I mean, in order to have higher penetration and adoption of customers of EVs, we need to tackle the range anxiety actually. And currently, well, we're still not in a critical mass to have positive ROI maybe on charging infrastructures, but it surely will come. So we need a kickoff of this infrastructure's establishment in order to boost the EV penetration. And it already goes. I mean, we see governments that supports with the policies, either with direct or indirect incentives or penalties that motivates industry players to build these infrastructures. And I think this will, once we have appropriate infrastructures, we'll see much higher penetration of EVs.
Thanks. Dominique, I'll bring you in here. We talked a little bit about creating the right environment and conditions to attract investment into this space. I think that goes hand in hand with the idea of eliminating hurdles and making things predictable. Can you maybe talk about the conditions that need to exist in the EV space in order to attract even more significant investment going forward?
Yeah, that's correct. In fact, I think what is I think a valuable goal is not only how we can bring EV to the tipping point, but even beyond the tipping point. So of course, if we're looking at not 5-10% of the cars being electric vehicles, but much higher. So when we start going into the 50% and more, that is a very interesting zone. I mean, I think we have created that in Norway a bit indirectly through the incentives, but you can see when this parity is created, how the market reacts, and it's extremely positive for EV. But I think back to infrastructure, what is really important to do, if you look at the number of vehicles, not only cars, but buses as well, and other commuting vehicles, you need a significant size of infrastructure. And typically, not only one investor can do it, or not just the government, you need a very significant amount of capital to do that. And that's why that inevitably, you need to bring, in a way, the more institutional capital in this, but creating as well the environment and the conditions that allow that form of capital to be present. And this, as we see, is made possible with the increased number of vehicles on the road. So you see the volume of not only cars, but charging sessions and average working sessions. We're not at 5 or 6 kilowatt hour per session. We're more like at 15, 18 on a DC charger, and the number is going up. So you have the volume in electricity going up, but also the frequency, the predictability of usage from all these users. So all of that creates a data set that allows, among other things, typical infrastructure investors, even infrastructure funds that would not have looked at the sector 5 years ago, to be looking at this very seriously right now. I think a case in point was when we saw Meridian, the large French, in fact global, but French-based infrastructure fund, acquiring Allego in the Netherlands, which was one of the Drakestar transactions, but really looking at Allego as a company in the sector where they could eventually invest in the EV charging infrastructure. So basically, it is becoming a legitimate asset class slowly.
So we've talked, both Tal and Dominique talked about infrastructure as a challenge at charging stations. I know overall we talked as a panel beforehand about the cost and trying to manage that cost and bringing that cost down, and the cost needing to be brought down in order for the technology really to become more widely used. Moran, do you want to talk about that a little bit from your perspective, what bringing down the cost could do?
Yes. So we see from the industry today that the biggest inhibitor in terms of the vehicle is the cost of the powertrain, or the ratio between cost to performance. It is still not as competitive as internal combustion engine vehicles are today. And I think the moment we technologically find a solution to bring this cost to a competitive level, this would accelerate the penetration of different types of electric vehicles. And I think from our perspective as a component designer, this is the number one engineering feature we're looking at and optimizing to help the industry accelerate its penetration.
Thanks, Moran. Houde, come to you, and with the OEM's perspective, I know a lot of the technology companies in the room are probably very interested in that. With the way you think about customer experience, it brings together a lot of different threads that we've talked about regarding challenges. Can you talk about what you're focused on at GM and the customer experience?
Yeah, when I think about customer experience at General Motors, and I specifically think about an end-to-end customer experience, something more holistic, and there are two main focal points, and I want to dwell first on the second one. When you have already purchased your vehicle and you're going to drive from X to Y and maybe back home, and what it takes to have this end-to-end customer experience that is worry-free, tackles range anxiety, and gives you a frictionless drive. And a few things were mentioned here already, the infrastructure from various perspectives, and from customer experience, this infrastructure must also be visible and accessible. A user must see a lot of information about these charging stations, the availability, the rating, the health, all these things that allow him to choose the right charging station or allow a tool optimally to choose it for the user. So if you buy a Chevrolet Bolt, you get with it a mobile app. This is a route planner, very important to reach this infrastructure, and you can add your destinations, and it calculates an energy forecast, and it finds the charging stations for you. And as you have a lot of time at a charging station, you usually spend there at least half an hour. It should find the ones where you can have lunch, do your errands, play with the kids on a playground. Everything that lets you effectively spend this time. And so we mentioned route planning, we mentioned infrastructure. And by the way, infrastructure also for people who do not have a home charger or a work charger, but who are dependent on public charging for daily charge. In China and Korea, this is a large problem. In the US, it's a little less than in Europe, but still it's significant in an urban environment if people want to own a car. Another aspect is the purchasing and learning experience today, and you have mentioned one which is very important. We are not yet at cost competitiveness, but I'm going to be only an EV owner if I can afford it. And the second factor to this is choice. If I go to General Motors today, there is only the Bolt. I go to Tesla, there's two models. I want to go to General Motors and there's an SUV and a CUV and a truck and there's several sedans, and I have a choice like I have with ICE vehicles today. And the sales experience is also something we can maybe talk a little bit more about. It's not yet dedicated to electric vehicles. And also General Motors would like to extend the customer experience to a lot of different business models for fleet owners to give service, for sharing options privately or publicly, urban mobility, all these areas. So it's kind of an end-to-end customer experience for many different scenarios.
Thank you, Houde. I'm going to bring in Daniel. We've talked about some of the challenges that exist, ways that we can work to overcome those hurdles. Government has an important role to play in that, and we look comparatively between different jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions have done a lot to incentivize the development of EV technology, and we've seen an impact from that. How do you think about government's role in creating an environment where EV technology can proliferate?
So I think our approach or our role in that sector is of course not in the technology. I mean, we can't really do the batteries better, although we do try to support research and development within the academia and to increase the power transfer between the Israeli companies and the Israeli academy. So this is one thing that we do which is very basic, and it's not really about implementing in the Israeli market, but rather to advance the technology as a whole in the world. So this is one thing that we do. Regarding the Israeli market, so of course our role at the moment when the technology or when we still have many challenges to implement EVs, and I'm not talking about, again, it's very easy to think only about passenger cars, but think about first and foremost buses and micro-mobility. And there our role is more significant. We do need to subsidize the infrastructure in order to solve the chicken and the egg problem, in which no one buys because there's no infrastructure, and companies are not doing infrastructure because there are no consumers. So this is one thing that we need to do. Second, there's a lot to be done in the hardcore regulatory framework, regulation, standards, things like that. We need to remember that the way we see it, the government is one player in the ecosystem. The whole ecosystem together, and utilities, OEMs, municipalities, governments, should do those things together and to think what's each one of them role and the way to do it. And I'll finish with that I think that our role today is more important than our role in 10 years from now. In 10 years from now, when we will have many models and the total cost of ownership because the reduction of prices in the batteries, etc., our role will be different. Today, we are at the time that the technology is ready. We do have 4 million cars, EVs, that have been sold around the world, and we need to do this effort to help it happen in Israel as well.
Thanks, Daniel. I think it's a good point you make regarding the role now versus what the role could be going forward. And I think it speaks to the government's opportunity to be a catalyst in this respect. We've got a number of different stakeholders here, and we've got our government person at the end. The opportunity for you all who are working in this space to think about the types of policies that you've seen, looking at different jurisdictions that you think have been effective and made an impact. Tal, are things that you've seen and would like to see more of across the globe as you're looking at what works and what doesn't work?
If we'll start from Israel, which is not representing the entire world, but still this is our environment as a distributor, then there is a government policy and there are incentives for EVs in Israel. Currently, we don't see a high penetration rate, but it will come. I mean, we have high penetration rate of plug-in hybrids and hybrid vehicles, but nowadays, for example, if Houde mentioned the choice of customers and the value proposition, if we now can offer an Audi e-tron with a great value proposition compared to other models, then there is a good choice for the customers, and it's mainly thanks to the manufacturer that produces such a vehicle, but also to the government that incentivizes with much lower taxation upon these vehicles compared to internal combustion engine. If we look globally, I mean, the highest penetration rate nowadays in terms of percentages is Norway. Norway I visited already 10 years ago, and nowadays it's almost 50% of the new car sales are electric vehicles. Already 10 years ago, you had EV models that penetrated quite well thanks to incentives and government policy. For example, free parking lots in Oslo, which is very expensive for an internal combustion engine, and usage of public transportation routes. Besides that, when we look at the global market of cars, you see that the highest penetration is within countries or continents that adopts policy. In China, that the government pushes either with incentives, for example, no license fees in Shanghai, or tax incentives, and for example in Europe with the WLTP. So maybe penalties, but still it motivates the industry to shift towards this direction. And in general, I mean, nowadays with when the penetration rate is still relatively low, single-digit percentage, it's an incubation period that must be pushed by by governments and nations' policies until it will come to a mature phase, and then it will, the economy of scale and the industry will be mature enough to support its own.
Thank you. A couple of our panelists have talked about micro-mobility, and I think, I know IRP is involved in micro-mobility, and how do you think about that in terms of its relationship with, we tend to default to thinking of cars and when we think of EVs, but obviously it's a much more expansive universe than that, and that's the way that you think about it at IRP, right?
Right. So I think electrification is not only changing the way we generate power, but it actually enables us to rethink about vehicles, about cars, to expand the traditional model of a passenger car that we are all used to drive. And actually, thanks to electrification, we can redesign new models and new forms of vehicles, of personal vehicles, of urban vehicles, of flying cars, of different types of urban and micro vehicles that can not only be greener and cleaner energy, but can also be more suitable to highly populated areas and take a smaller parking place. Also, the electrification is a much better infrastructure for connectivity, for fleet management, for autonomous vehicles. All those control levels are much more reasonable and possible to manage when you have an electric powertrain that is very easy to maintain and to control. So we think it's a very unique point in time where all those new vehicles are evolving, and also the vehicle architecture is changing accordingly, because in small vehicles you cannot just duplicate the traditional vehicle architecture known for decades. We need to rethink about the electronics of the vehicle, how to connect it to the cloud to support fleet management, how to protect it from cyber attacks when you have now so much capability to control the vehicle remotely. And it's a very challenging and interesting period. We're very thrilled to be part of this revolution.
Daniel, we were talking about micromobility, and it's interesting. It's certainly a lot of opportunity comes from that, and I'm here in Israel. It looks like there is a good balance between allowing that technology to exist and be available. I'm from the United States, and in places in the United States, in cities, big cities, they're just outright banning certain forms of micromobility, which work and perform well in other places. From a kind of city and country perspective, how do you think about creating laws and rules that allow micromobility to exist harmoniously side by side with cars?
So first of all, I mean disruption. We are at a time of disruption. It's very hard to understand what is going to happen. I don't think anyone saw what will happen with micromobility in Tel Aviv. I mean, nobody recognized it at time, and I think we will have more surprises on the way. But we need, I mean, in this time, you need to work, and it's not easy for the government, but you need to work in an agile way. I mean, you need to be very responsive, but not, you don't put the regulation too fast, that you will just, clog the innovation spirit. So we need to work together with the companies to understand what we need to do. Eventually, a lot of that, I think, is connected to infrastructure, which is even harder to change fast. So, I mean, it's not, if today, I mean, maybe 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, we didn't thought of, a bicycle lane, which today And I'm not an urban planner, but it sounds very right. Why not? We didn't think about it, so infrastructure will take time to change, but we need to work together and to see how we can do it. Everyone should remember that, again, micromobility, again, and electric micromobility, so electric scooter today can help you do your commute distance easily, fast. You don't have any problem of total cost of ownership because it's already economically viable. And we need to see how we increase the utilization rate of these things and not to stop it.
Thank you, Daniel. Uta, I guess, curious from a OEM's perspective and a car company, or historically car company as large as General Motors, how you view that, and is it, I think that my sense is that GM has viewed it collaboratively as opposed to trying to shut down technology like that. How do you think about new forms of mobility like micro-mobility, and how do you see that becoming, or do you see it becoming part of your business model going forward?
Yeah, it's unfortunately not exactly my area of expertise within GM. So General Motors has its own division called Maven. It's a project that has shared solution, fleet solutions, and urban mobility solutions, and it's actually a big part of General Motors today, and we're always working on new solutions for that, because frankly speaking, the large cities are so overcrowded. Like Tel Aviv is comparatively small, but if you go to Shanghai or Beijing or some cities like New York, yeah, they're allowed to collapse. They're like kind of maxed out when it comes to mobility. And so we are equally working with partners together and with suppliers, because you can really, as everybody said, not do it alone, to find solutions for that too. And in terms of a customer experience, we are also trying to have end-to-end solutions which combine private ownership with urban mobility. For example, you start in your private car from the suburbs to drive to a parking area where you can charge your car, and then you go with a cab or some type of EV mobility vehicle to your work, maybe the last mile with an e-bike, or all kinds of other solutions. So it's kind of a combination of from where the customer comes and where he needs to go.
The time goes by very quickly up here, and obviously there's lots to talk about with respect to EV, and we've only had an opportunity to just whet your appetite. But we'll come back to maybe a last question. I'll let everybody respond on this. It's a bit of a vision question when you think about EV going into the future. I'll start with you, Dominique, and then come back, and we'll flip back to Daniel. But when you think about EV and it becoming widely used, what are you most looking forward to as a result of mainstream adoption of electric vehicles?
Well, I think this is ultimately a better user experience and, of course, quality of life and emissions in large cities. But I think at the end, the message behind this, to get to this point, clearly we will be looking at a partnership. I think that is really a matter to get a change of that magnitude. There will be a partnership between some key technology companies, between the OEMs, but also with this the more large private source of funds, which will see this additional volume and this predictability as being a factor, and maybe ultimately what will accelerate and make the sector as large as it can be.
Thanks, Dominique. Tal?
Well, for 14 years I've been working in the automotive industry, and no big change have occurred till recently. So it's very interesting to see where will it lead us in the near future, and for surely it will change. Moran mentioned also the sharing economy, and well, if you look at the economy of EVs, then the total cost of ownership, you must utilize the vehicles more. So business models will change, and for us as a distributor as well. And I'm very thrilled about the future to come and to see where it goes.
Moran?
I think we're right now in the middle of the biggest revolution since the beginning of the history of cars. It's completely going to change in 10, 20 years from now. Our children and the next generation will not perceive cars as we did. It's a huge change, and I think it's it's great to see that the entire industry and ecosystem is already realizing that and working to be prepared to this change. I would just like to add one more thing that I think we need to handle, and it's the fun to drive. For 100 years, vehicle manufacturers and designers worked very hard on this point, and we need to maintain this capability with electric vehicles.
Good point. Houde?
For us, it's mainly doing what we are great at. It's building electric vehicles that have all the bells and whistles like ICE vehicles, that have safety features, autonomous driving features, that have ADAS features, inductive charging, whatever is needed to make this an exceptional experience and a really highly competitive and at the same time affordable vehicle. But then really we cannot do it alone. Nobody can do it alone, and we partner with everybody needed, with the government, with infrastructure, charge providers, whoever is needed to bring this customer experience, and people are compelled to buy electric vehicles, preferably from us.
Very good. Daniel, the government gets to be the last word on this.
So I hope electrification will help us to change the model split, and unfortunately for the OEMs to sell less private cars, and that people will choose more efficient way to move themselves between places, that they will use electric buses, electric taxis, electric share taxis, electric micro-mobility, and again will help us to achieve what we want in the aspects of air pollution, congestion. That's my belief, or where I want to see the things in 10 years from now.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thanks to all of you, and thanks to EcoMotion.